Can you see the screen right now? This one?
Yeah, I can see the airplane.
Guess not. You just said it working too. Alright. We're gonna audible then. No big deal. No biggie. Alright. That's disappointing. Whatever. We're still going to talk about the Bible. It's going to be okay. I'll decide for that. Alright, so this month we're talking about sin and the oppression of sin. And when I first started this thought, I talked about last week, I was like, am I really going to talk about sin for an entire month? And the answer is yes, we're going to talk about sin. But it's not going to be this negative, like, sin, we're just terrible people, we're scum of the earth. It's not going to be any of that. But it's going to be, what I hope to be, a little bit more hopeful kind of view and a more empowering view. Not that, sin is bad, but we can overcome it. And sin does not have to overcome us. Also, the Bible shows us that sin is oppressive. Sin is oppressive. And last week we talked about the children of Israel in Egypt and how Egypt oppressed the children of Israel. That's our kind of correlation, how we see all those things that happened, all those things that went on, and the actions of Pharaoh and what he did to the people and how he made them work and he doubled their workload and he took away their straw, he made things hard, and he wouldn't let us go. All these things happened, and that's what sin wants to do and frankly does to people. Sin oppresses people. And so on this week, we're to get our thought going. Sin is not just bad. Sin is not just bad. Sin is an oppressor. So, Baker, to get our thought going, if you get John chapter 10, and read verses 7 through 10. John chapter 10, read verses 7 through 10. Sin is an oppressor. Sin is an oppressor. What does that say?
Then Jesus said to them again, most assuredly I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and go in and out and find pasture. The thief does not come except to steal, and to kill, and to destroy. I have come that they may have life, and that they may have it more abundantly.
So the thief does not come, but for to steal, kill, and destroy. When we think about someone stealing something, they're taking something away. This is what the thief does. And Jesus made an allusion to all that came before me were thieves and robbers, but we want to take this principle, what the thief wants to do. Why does a thief come into a sheepfold? The only reason why he's there to either steal something, to take something away, to kill, to take a life, or to destroy, to leave something in complete ruins, and to leave something way worse than when he left it. That's the only reason why a thief will ever want to interact with somebody and somebody's stuff. Now, this is going to show my age. Drake and Josh, great show. And there was one episode where Drake and Josh, they wanted to do something really nice for their parents. They wanted to show them they appreciated them, and it was their anniversary. And so they saw an ad, and they won, quote unquote, won a sweepstakes where the people said, hey, we're going to come in there, we're going to give y'all all new furniture. We're going to remodel the whole stuff. And the stipulation was, just leave a key under the mat and leave the house at night. And so, of course, when they came back, they brought their parents and all their stuff was gone. It was like, and they said, why did you do this? And that we thought they were going to come in, and it sounded dumb to them when they resaid it. But that's why thieves come in. They're not coming in to, oh, we're going to take your stuff out and leave better stuff. That's not why thieves go in there. They go in there to take stuff. They go in there to kill. They go in there to destroy. To leave things way worse than when they found it. And that is what sin does to us and does to our lives. It does to humanity. That's what it does. And so, to begin, we're going to look at this week, or today, this morning, sin is deceptive. Sin is deceptive. Let's look over in Genesis chapter 3. Sin is deceptive. And one of the ways it oppresses us is by deceiving us. Sin is deceptive. Genesis chapter 3, we know this, but some things I want us to point out. We're going to start in verse number 1. It says, "Now the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, Indeed, has God said, you shall not eat from any tree of the garden?" First off, he comes in and said, is that really what God said? Is that what he said? Think about this deception. Verse number 2. "The woman said to the serpent, From the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat. But from the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God has said, You shall not eat from it, or touch it, or you will die. The serpent said to the woman, You surely will not die." So first he said, is that what really God said? And then he said, that's not going to happen. Verse number 5. "For God knows that in the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." And now he's showing, look at the opportunity cost. Look what God is trying to keep away from you. So first he said, is that really what God said? And when I read these, I wanted to write those things down because we're going to allude to this later on. Is that what God said? Think about this. Use your mind's whiteboard. Is that what God said? And then he said in verse number 4, that's not really good. It's not going to be that bad. It's not that big of a deal. And then in verse number 5, he said, God's trying to keep some stuff from you. Opportunity cost. If you just do it, look what you're missing out. So all this is deception. Verse number 6, "When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise, she took from it its fruit and ate, and she gave also her husband with her, and he ate." He got it. He got it. How? Because at first he said, is that really what God said? And then he mixes some truth with a lie. When the serpent said, you will not surely die, was that all the way wrong? In a sense, it wasn't. They didn't drop down dead right there. And then when he showed them the opportunity cost, was that partially true? In a sense, they began to know good and evil. So why was this so effective? Why was this so deceptive? Because he used those tactics and that language to subvert them and cause them to not do what God said, ultimately causing them to sin. And so when we think about sin, sin is very deceptive, and ultimately it wants to deceive us in order to steal from us, in order to kill us, and to destroy us. We all know people, I'm sure, whose lives are just wrecked by sin. Just wrecked. And I appreciate what Billy had mentioned this morning, talking about telling people the truth and being loving. And he said, is it always going to be pretty? And I was going to make this comment, but I wanted this comment for my lesson. And I thought about whenever someone is coming off of an addiction, and they're getting off of drugs, they're getting off of alcohol, they're getting off of any addictive substance, what's that moment right after they're just getting off? Withdrawals. The time of withdrawals. Is that fun for anybody? No. It hurts. As a matter of fact, I was talking to a girl yesterday, and she was mentioning from a medical perspective that whenever your body gets so dependent on something, it stops producing it itself. And so whenever you take away that substance, now your body is having to figure out, okay, what's going on here? Why is this not coming in the way? And then I have to figure out again, okay, I need to produce this on my own. And that period is very painful. And so when we think about sin, and we want people to get out of sin, we want brothers in Christ to get out of sin, the world to get out of sin, the not pretty part is probably going to be the time where it's like, okay, it's going to hurt for a little bit because you're getting used to being away from the theft, and the destruction of sin. Whenever we try to bring people into a better life and put ourselves into a better life and make better choices, there might be that period of getting people away from sin that it starts to hurt a little bit. But ultimately, as any good doctor or any good person that cares about your health, they know you just got to stick it out. You got to stick it out. Stick it out through there. But what sin wants to do is it wants to keep you there. Look over at Hebrews chapter 3. Hebrews chapter 3. This is a more explicit explanation, and really the New Testament talking about the deceitfulness of sin. And thinking about the context of Hebrews chapter 3, matter of fact, we're just going to read it. Starting in verse number 1. It says, "Therefore, holy brethren, partakers of a heavenly calling, consider Jesus, the apostle and high priest of our confession. He was faithful to him who appointed him, as Moses also was in all his house. For he has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses, by just so much as the builder of the house has more honor than the house. For every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. Now Moses was faithful in all his house as a servant, for a testimony of those things which were to be spoken later. But Christ was faithful as a son over his house," right here, "whose house we are, if we hold fast our confidence and boast of our hope firm until the end." Why was it such a upsetting of faith whenever someone would say the resurrection already happened? It's already all over. What they're saying is, you might as well just give up now. You might as well just, you missed it. And here he's saying, we're Christ's house if we stick with it. If we stick with it. Then in verses 7 through 11, he quotes from Psalm 95, and he alludes to the children of Israel. The reason this is important because the children of Israel hardened their hearts. They hardened their hearts. Verse number 7. "Therefore, just as the Holy Spirit says, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as when they provoked me, as in the day of trial in the wilderness, where your fathers tried me by testing me, and saw my works for 40 years. The children of Israel, they saw God's works firsthand, 40 years, and they still tested him. Verse number 10. "Therefore I was angry with this generation, and said, they always go astray in their heart, and they did not know my ways. As I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest." Those first group, that first generation of the children of Israel that came out of Egypt, that literally saw God's working, they hardened their hearts. And God said, they're not going to do it. They're not going to go in. But here the Hebrews writer applies that to the Christian. Look at verse number 12. It says, "Take care, brethren, that there not be any one of you with an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God. But encourage one another day after day, as long as it is still called today, so that none of you will be hardened by the what? Deceitfulness of sin." First clause of verse number 14, "For we have become partakers of Christ." First off, I want to mention this. Talking about evil, unbelieving heart falling away from the living God. I'm sure there's many of us that know somebodies that they fell away. When we say, "Oh, that's where they fell away. That's that family that fell away." And while it is everybody's individual responsibility to guard their own heart, guard their own faith, he says, encourage one another while it's called today. We become partakers. That's the idea of sharing. We're all sharing with Christ. Brethren, we need to encourage one another. And not all the responsibility goes on the group, but there is some responsibility on the individuals that don't encourage someone when they're falling away, or before they're falling away. There's a concept. It's basically the idea that whenever someone does something wrong, there are more people responsible than that person. And it's the idea like a family. If something with my children or my wife or anything that's under me, okay, I bear some of the responsibility. Not all of it, but I bear some of the responsibility. Because I'm in close proximity, I'm the leader of the house, I bear some responsibility. And I want to encourage us, we bear some responsibility to each other's faith. Not all of it, but we bear some of it. If we create an environment that is just unencouraging, we bear some responsibility. Let's encourage one another. And it says, why? So that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. Sometimes what sin does is it just makes us callous. It makes it to where we no longer feel, or we no longer want to respond, or we no longer want to yield to, yeah, we probably shouldn't do that. And sin is deceitful, it lies, and it makes it to where, did God say that? It's not really going to be that bad. Look at what you're missing out on. Sin does that. We'll get into more specific examples in just a moment. But I wanted to show that point right there, that God has shown us sin is deceitful. And one of its oppressive tactics is to lie. It's always to lie. Daniel, if you don't mind, read Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4, read verses 20 through 22. And we're going to further emphasize this idea of being deceitful, of being tricky. What does it say?
But ye have not so learned Christ, if so, be that ye have heard him, and been taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus, that ye put off concerning the former conversation the old man, which is corrupt according to deceitful lust. According to deceitful lust. Another thing I appreciate about today's class, I didn't say it because I wanted content for my own lesson. Talking about Paul's past and his conversion. Paul had something to look back on and say, I don't want to be like that anymore. Unfortunately, I won't even say unfortunately, inevitably, some people that are raised in the church, quote unquote, they don't always have that moment or that quote unquote past life that was so heinous and bad to look back on and say, I'm just, it just is what it is. But we all have some things that tempt each and every one of us. And those lusts, those desires for things that are wrong, they're deceitful. I know so many people, men especially, that they say, I still struggle every day with getting that hood ghetto mentality out of my mind. Been Christians for years, still trying to get that past life out of them. Some things may happen and they want to resort back to it. Why? Because it's deceitful. In the past, the way you dealt with something is you beat it up. For some people, that's how they did it. For some people, the way they dealt with something is they killed it. For some people, the way they dealt with something was they, outsmarted it, made it look dumb. And sometimes we get in scenarios where we want to revert back to that old way of thinking, the old way of living. And it's deceitful. It's tricky. Look over 2 Peter chapter 2. It's tricky. Of course, a robber is not going to come in here and say, I'm going to rob your house. No, they're going to use means in order to deceive. 2 Peter chapter 2. Here's another one. Here in the context, talking about false prophets. Starting in verse number 1, 2 Peter chapter 2. It says, but false prophets also arose among the people, just as there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly introduce destructive heresies, even denying the master who bought them, bringing swift destruction upon themselves. Many will follow their sensuality, and because of them, the way of truth will be maligned. And in their greed, they will exploit you with false words. Their judgment from long ago is not idle, and their destruction is not asleep. That's the context of 2 Peter chapter 2. Peter is talking about these false prophets coming in and doing whatever they want. Drop down to verse number 13. Drop down to verse number 13. Verse number 17, actually. Talking about these false prophets, it says, these are springs without water, and mist driven by a storm, for whom the blackness and darkness have been reserved, for speaking out arrogant words of vanity. It says they do what? What does yours say? They what? Mine says entice. Anybody has anything else? Grace words of vanity.
Grace words of vanity. They lure. There it is. I thought about Baker when I was doing it in my plan. This is my plan. Right? My plan was to have it up on the screen. I have the definition of the word in my concordance called BDAC. Now I'm going to put it up on the screen. I'm going to have Baker read it. I know he's a fisherman. That word lure, it's a fishing term. It's to bait.
We were talking yesterday, and Baker's in the moment. He's struggling right now. He can't figure out what the fish are biting on right now. And I thought about that because you can't just throw anything out there. You have to throw out there what they want. You got to throw out there what they want at the right time, at the right place. We talked about water temperature the other day. You got to throw out what they want. And here it says that they are luring people. They're using words and phrases and ideas to let people do whatever they want. And then once they bite on, they got it. They got it. And that's what these guys are doing. They're enticing, they're luring by how? Fleshly desires, sensuality, those who barely escape from the ones who live in error, promising them freedom, while they themselves are the slaves of corruption. Whenever we think about, is that really what God said? It's not that bad. Look what you're missing out on. We can insert anything we want in there. And when you have people come in and lure people by those things that they already want to do, or their past life wanted them to do, they lure them and they catch them. And these people are promising freedom, but they themselves don't have the freedom that they are promising. It says, for by what a man is overcome, by this he is enslaved. By what a man is overcome, by this he is enslaved. You have these false teachers that are coming in probably for money. And they're overcome by this covetousness, and it enslaves them. When we think about sin, it does the same thing. It overcomes, and then it enslaves. Baker, get John chapter 8. John chapter 8, and read verse number 34 when you get there. When we think about sin and its seriousness and its deception, at first it has to overcome, and then it enslaves. What does it say? This is Jesus speaking, by the way, John 8:34.
Jesus answered them, most assuredly I say to you, whoever commits sin is a slave of sin.
Now, another thing I plan to do, you look at this word commit, you look at the way it is in the original, it's the idea to continue doing. So it has an ing on it in the original idea, ing. So whoever's committed, whoever continues to keep doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it, you become a slave of it. It's not this thing where you and sin just have a great relationship, and, you go to the house every once in a while. No. You keep practicing sin, you become a slave to it. You become dependent on it, and it puts its thumb on you, and it oppresses you, and it makes your life worse, and every time. And it does this partially by deception. Now, to finish out, look over in Mark chapter 7. Mark chapter 7, and bring out your brain's whiteboard again, and consider in Genesis chapter 3, whenever the serpent would say, is that really what God said? And then he would talk about, that's not really going to happen. It's not that bad. And then he would mention some of the opportunity costs. And I want to plug in some, what I believe to be relevant examples. And the first one, we think about the home and families and husbands. Whenever the Bible says, husbands, do not be bitter against your wives. The deception of bitterness is crazy. And sometimes it can creep in and be like, well, she deserves it. Sometimes it can creep in like, did God really talk about it? That's not bitterness. And it's not really that bad because she deserves it. And who does bitterness benefit? Who does bitterness benefit? It benefits nobody. But who does it hurt? It hurts you, it hurts your loved ones, hurts you can't even work on the job right. It just deteriorates everything in your life. But why does it still creep in? Because it's deceptive. Because it's alluring. Because it gives us that sense of, I have a right to feel this way. When it talks about wives respecting your husbands, I've heard this before. I've heard a wife, well, he doesn't deserve it. That may be true. You know how the serpent said, you will not surely die. He knows that you're going to have a knowledge of good and evil. He mixed in some truth in there. Is it maybe true that your husband doesn't deserve respect? Maybe his actions weren't warranted of it. Maybe. But who does that hurt? Who does not respecting your husband benefit? Nobody. But it hurts everything and everybody involved. It hurts everybody. And so it's no wonder God said, wives, respect your husbands. Husbands, love your wives. Don't be bitter against them. Raise your children. Even though these things are difficult, even though these things may have times where it's like, no. Do it anyways. Billy, get Proverbs chapter 15 and verse number 1. I know I said Mark 7. So. Proverbs chapter 15 and verse number 1. In my observation, a big superpower is a woman with a meek and quiet spirit. And you know, if you approach men with some masculine energy as a man, he's probably going to respond with some masculine energy back. You don't want that. What does Proverbs chapter 15 and verse number 1 say?
Proverbs 15:1. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger.
You come with this masculine energy of like, what you want to do. That's what you're going to receive back. But if you go the opposite way, and you show some respect, and you come with a soft answer, that's both ways. That's any conflict, anything. Then it starts to ease some things down. But what does sin want to do? It wants to deceive us and make us feel like, no, you need to tell them. You need to tell them, make sure they know. That's what sin wants us to do. And it's deceptive. It's tricky. Why do we do it? Because it's deceptive. Mark chapter 7. Mark chapter 7. Start with me in verse number 20. It says, and he was saying, that which proceeds out of the man, that is what defiles the man. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed, what's the first one? Evil thoughts. You don't think evil thoughts are deceptive? There's a concept, of course, in law. There's a difference between killing, murder, and premeditated murder. If I'm driving and someone jumps out from my car and they die, it's like, that's tragic. But I didn't mean to, and so I'm going to get a lesser punishment. But whenever you have premeditated murder, where you have someone that you thought about this, you schemed this, you pictured all this in your head, it sat right with you, and not only that, but you actually went and did it. That's top tier, in Texas, that'll get you death penalty, life minimum, in most circumstances. Whenever we think about evil thoughts, one of the deceptions of evil thoughts is, well, I'm not doing it. Well, I'm not doing it, so it's not really that bad. But why is premeditated murder considered so much more heinous than accidental? Because you thought about it, and you made a plan and you did it. And what starts in our mind usually ends up in our actions and out of our mouth. So let's not succumb to the deception of it. I'm just thinking about it. I'm not really going to do it. I just told her that in my mind. I'm not really going to say it out loud. Let's not do that either. What's the next one after evil thoughts?
Adultery.
You know the deception in that? We make a laundry list of exceptions and things and reasons why we are justified in doing what we're doing. It's deceptive. What's the next one?
Fornication.
Our culture is ridden in this. Ridden in this. Next one, thefts. Stealing. Well, they don't deserve it anyways. I've heard that so much, especially in the business world. Especially whenever you talk about rich and poor, well, they don't deserve it. They don't work as hard as we do. That might be true. But it's not right to steal. It's never right to steal. What's the next one? Murders. Verse number 22. Covetousness. This one's big for our culture. You know how deceptive covetousness is? How easy that is, especially for a man. I'll speak from my man's perspective. For covetousness to creep in. We want comfort, we want security. But are we ever content? that creeps in. It's deceptive. And here's what I hear. Well, I'm just doing this so I can give more to other people. It's deceptive. Wickedness, deceit, envy, slander, pride. You know what's very deceptive is slander. Talking bad about people just for talking about, well, they did that. Yeah, they did it, but it doesn't mean that just talking bad about it for no reason. Pride is deceptive. Verse number 23, all these evil things proceed from within and defile man. The things that defile us, they begin by tricking us. They begin by deceiving us. They begin by making us think, hey, this is all right. God didn't really say that. And look at the things that you're missing out. It's deceptive. It's tricky. And it wants to bring us in, and it wants to overcome us, and enslave us, and oppress us, which ultimately would completely deteriorate our lives. So in conclusion, like I said, sin is just deceptive. It's trying to trick us. It's trying to bring us in. And what's very, very tricky, the things we really need to be careful about, one of the things I took from Brother Daniel's lesson a few weeks ago, was there are some things that aren't inherently wrong, that are actually good, that are actually necessary for our bodily function. The first thing that the devil tempted Jesus with was what? Food. But Jesus responded in Matthew 4, verse number 4, man shall not live by bread alone. We need to watch those things that are not wrong, if they can become wrong. Another plan I had was to write really big at social media. There is nothing wrong with downloading that Facebook app. But whenever it starts to take over our lives, take over our minds, whenever we start to have envying thoughts and jealousy toward other people and their accomplishments, and we see that's not right. That's not right. Some of the jobs we have, these are necessary. But whenever that starts to take the place of God, recreation, even our children, even our families, these are good things, but sometimes they can be taken to extremes and points where it's no longer right. We need to be careful of those things and not just justify ourselves, but be on guard for the trickiness and the deception of sin. That's the message. I hope you're encouraged. If you have any, please